All right, let's get right into it. The climate crisis. It's a topic that can feel overwhelming, right? Almost too big to wrap your head around. But today we're going to try to cut through some of that noise. We're going to follow the data and see if we can find out what's really at the heart of the problem.
You've heard this a million times, I'm sure. The story goes that climate change is our collective fault. That we're all in this together and every single one of us is equally responsible. It's a very simple narrative.
But is it really that simple? Is that the whole story? What if the blame isn't spread out so evenly? It kind of makes you wonder who is truly responsible when you start digging a little deeper.
So our first stop has to be the emissions themselves. And when you actually look at the numbers, you realize something pretty shocking. The problem is huge, absolutely, but its source is surprisingly specific.
Okay, get ready for this. This chart tells a huge part of the story. Since 1988, a staggering 71% of all industrial CO2 emissions have come from just 100 companies. Just let that sink in for a second. 71% from only 100 companies. Not nations, not billions of people, 100 corporate entities.
So who are they? Well, the names on this list probably won't surprise you. It's basically a who's who of the fossil fuel world. Saudi Aramco, ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron. These are the giants producing the oil, gas, and coal that power our planet. And as it turns out, they're also the primary source of its industrial emissions.
But, fossil fuels are only one side of the coin. There's another, quieter engine that's driving this crisis forward: deforestation. We're tearing down the very ecosystems that are supposed to be our planet's lungs.
Every single year, the world loses about 10 million hectares of forest. And honestly, that number is so big, it's hard to even picture. It just feels abstract, What does 10 million hectares even look like?
Well, here's a way to make it real. Imagine the entire country of Portugal. Its cities, its farms, its beautiful coastline, just gone. That is the amount of forest we lose every single year. It's a staggering scale of destruction.
And you have to ask why. This table draws a pretty clear line. You have agribusiness giants like JBS and Cargill clearing vast forests for beef and soy. You've got palm oil producers doing the exact same thing. And who's buying from them? Well, it's brands we see every day. Nestle, Unilever, PepsiCo. It's a supply chain that starts in the forest and ends up in our shopping carts. Now, this kind of massive industrial operation, whether it's drilling for oil or clearing forests, it takes a ton of money. It doesn't just happen on its own. It needs funding. And that brings us to the next layer of this story, the money.
And this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we know how bad this is for the planet, for all of us, why does the money keep flowing? Why are banks and huge investors still pouring billions and billions of dollars into it?
And here it is, the brutally simple answer: $26 billion. That's how much profit banks and investors have made in just the last 8 years by financing companies tied to deforestation. At the end of the day, it continues because it is wildly, incredibly profitable.
And who's writing the checks? Again, we see some of the biggest names in the world of finance. We're talking about giants like Vanguard and BlackRock, JP Morgan Chase, and major European banks like BNP Paribas. Their investment is the fuel that keeps this whole engine running.
Now, a system this profitable and this destructive needs cover. It needs to protect itself. And one of the most powerful ways it does that is through a kind of green illusion. Let's look at a perfect example of this in action, something called bioenergy.
So on the surface, bioenergy sounds pretty good, right? You burn wood, it's a renewable resource to generate power. In fact, it gets huge government subsidies and is officially labeled as CO2 neutral, a green alternative to dirty coal. What could be wrong with that? Well, here's the catch. The whole carbon neutral idea relies on a new tree growing to suck up the carbon that was just released. But the reality is that carbon goes into the atmosphere instantly. A new tree, that takes decades, sometimes 100 years, to absorb that same amount. The timing is completely off.
So how does it get the official green stamp? It all comes down to a really clever bit of accounting. See, a country can burn wood pellets shipped from another continent. And guess what? Those emissions don't count on their record. They get counted way back in the country where the tree was actually cut down. It's a loophole that lets you look green while you're literally burning forests.
So when we put all these pieces together,
the massive corporate emitters, the industrial-scale deforestation, the financial backers, and this layer of greenwashing, you start to see that these aren't just separate problems. They're all part of one interconnected system.
And here's how that system keeps itself going. It's a cycle. You start with hugely profitable but destructive industries. That profit then buys political influence, which keeps regulations weak. The financial world sees those high returns and pours in even more money. And the whole thing is hidden behind a clever marketing campaign to make sure nobody asks too many questions.
And to be clear, this isn't some backroom conspiracy. The source material calls it organized inertia. It's a system that's been built piece by piece to resist change. Its main goal is simply to protect the very profitable way things are currently done, no matter what the cost is to the planet.
So when you look at the climate crisis, not as a vague problem caused by everyone, but as the outcome of a specific system with specific incentives, you get to a very different and I think much clearer conclusion. You get to a final truth.
The issue isn't humanity in the abstract, it's a very concrete economic system, a system that, time and time again, is designed to choose profit over life. And according to this analysis, that is the real cause of the climate crisis. It changes the question from what can I do to what can we do to change the system itself.